Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to this first part of my web dev series. I'm going to be teaching you HTML5 and CSS3 today. And what we're going to be doing is building this profile page, which is just a play on the old Facebook layout that I found just like an image on Google of and decided to build it up from scratch using HTML and CSS. So that's what we're going to be doing today, and hopefully we'll continue developing this into an actual social media website at the end. So let's get started. The first thing you want to do is pull up your favorite text editor. For me, it's Notepad++. A lot of people prefer Sublime, or you can use an IDE, whatever you prefer. I like Notepad++ just because it's simple and it's elegant. And I can do this. I'm going to start this document by giving it a language called HTML5. And this is actually an abbreviation that I can use a plugin called Emmet to expand into my HTML document. To do that, you can go to Plugin Manager and come down here to wherever Emmet is and just install it from here. And there's a whole bunch of other plugins that you can use as well. So if you've never seen HTML before, what we're looking at here are things called tags. HTML is written in tags. And there are start and end tags for most tags. And what that means is that they encompass other tags within them. And this is how HTML5 defines structure. Within this tag called head, I have two other tags. One is called meta and one is title. Meta just means some information that's beyond the scope of the structure of the HTML page. It's just saying that this character set of this page is UTF-8. It's just a standard. The title I'll just call profile, since we're making a profile page. Then I'm just going to save it to my desktop in a new folder called new website. You can call it whatever you want. I'm going to call this file index, and that's also just a standard. In the body tag is where I'm going to write all of my actual HTML structure for the page. So let's get started. The first thing you notice about this page is it's sort of split up into different rows and columns. And so part of the reason why I chose this page was because there's a lot going on about the HTML structure and the style as far as layout goes for this page. So the first thing I want to do is just start all the way over here and just make this one column, this one tab over here. We can see we have a search bar, a menu, and some advertisement, which is just a sample image I found on Google. So let's get started doing that. The first thing I'm going to write here is a div tag. And div tags are one of the most fundamental tags in HTML. They define the flow layout for HTML, which is just the standard layout style of HTML. They have a standard default display property of block, which means it takes up 100% width of the screen. And just to show you what I mean, this is just a header tag, just the main header tag. It goes H1, H2, up through, I think, H9. I've never honestly used beyond H4, I don't think. But this is the main header. And to show you what this is doing, I'm going to do this, and you don't need to worry about what I'm doing here right now. I will explain it later, and this is typically not good practice to just write inline style, but you can, and this is just for showing you the purpose of what the div looks like on the screen. So let's come over here and launch in Chrome, and we can see that this div takes up 100% width of the screen. You can see that if I resize the screen too, it'll just stay 100% width of the screen. So we're going to use a lot of divs. I prefer using divs to semantic elements. There are other semantic elements you can use, like header and footer and section. You can look into that if you'd like to. But I'm just going to use divs to keep it simple. Let's get rid of this inline style tag in this header for now. The first thing that's on the page that we're building is a search box. And to write that in HTML, I'm going to write input type equals text. I'll give it a name and call it search, and a placeholder search. And the placeholder is just what text shows up in the box before you start typing. You'll notice too that this input doesn't actually have an end tag. There are other tags like this as well that we'll see. Image is one of them. When we link images to our page, it doesn't actually have an end tag. But you'll also notice too that this search bar has this little icon for the magnifying glass. And it's really nice that HTML actually has a code for that, so we don't have to find an image and deal with doing that. And that's the code right there. You can just copy that. And you'll see here that we've created a search box with our little magnifying glass. The next thing is this menu. So let's go ahead and create a menu. Menus are defined by something called the unordered list tag. That's the UL tag. There's also something called an ordered list tag, or OL tag. The difference is the ordered list will be numbered, and the unordered list has a standard of bullets. But you saw that our list doesn't have bullets. We'll get rid of that in just a second using some style. You'll also notice that this list had elements to it, or list items, and that tag is called LI. Moreover, the list is clickable, or the list elements, the list items are clickable. And to make them clickable, as in to go to another page, we give it another tag within the list item called A, or an anchor tag. Now here's an important keyword, href. Href is what links different pages together. It'll give us, we just pass the path of the whatever page we want, for example, maybe profile.html or shared/profile.html if we had that folder and file. But we don't right now. We don't want it to go anywhere right now because we don't have any other pages, so let's just leave it blank. That'll just mean it does nothing. But that's how we link to other pages, and we'll see more of that as we go on. So here's my unordered list of all of the list items that I want in my list. Let's come back up here, and we see that we've got this. But as I said before, the default for the unordered list is this bullet. But ultimately, we don't want that bullet here. So let's do something else now. Let's dive into some style. What I've done here is put a tag up here in the head section called link. And I'm linking it using href again to a file called main.css. And this .css file is going to be our main style sheet. So let's create that now. Create a new file, give it a language of CSS, and just for now I'm going to type body and bracket it. And let's save this as main.css. And I just lowercase that. Let's change that. Now I've linked my HTML page to an external style sheet. What I did before was an inline style directive. That's usually not good practice, but it's possible. But you should usually try to stick with your CSS and HTML separated. So the way that we style things in this page now, or the way that CSS can actually see the page, is one way is just give it the name of a tag. Our body tag is our main tag, right? We can just give the whole tag one style directive, such as background color. Let's call it light gray for now. You can use hex values or RGB values for this as well. But let's just see what that does. We see that I've just changed my page to a background color of gray. I don't really want to do that now, so let's just leave nothing in that for now. Now I want to give some style to my unordered list. To do that, I'm going to give this a class name and call it list. Now, a class tag for any HTML element is going to allow us to come over here to our CSS file and say dot list and bracket. and it'll allow us to style now any tag that has a class of list. Now I could have said also ID equals list, in which case I would say pound list for my style sheet. And the difference is that IDs are unique, but classes can pertain to multiple tags in the same document. I'm going to use this class again, so I'm going to give it a class called list. And make sure you're saving frequently. That's also very important, really, for any kind of project you're doing like this. The first style directive I want to give is list style type :none. And list style type is going to define what the style for our list is, as far as the bullets or numbers or squares, what have you. And you can see now that I've gotten rid of that, but we've still got some problems with the spacing around here, so let's figure out how to fix that. Before we get into the style of it, I want to show you this. This is called the CSS box model, and for every element, let's say that the element is this around here, this dotted line. The element unordered list, if I gave it a margin, it would push out and move the elements around it away from it. If I gave it a padding, it would push the content within the element in, and the border around it is just between the element and the margin. So let's come back to our style sheet, and I would say margin 0, 0, 10 pixels, 0. What this means is this is a shorthand way of doing margin. Like there's also like margin top, margin left you can do as specific ones. This is a shorthand way of doing it, saying top margin is 0, right margin is 0, bottom is 10 pixels, and left margin is 0. And so it goes clockwise, and we can see what that does here. Just brings this up, and it actually added some margin down here just because I wanted a little bit of space between this and the image, which we'll get to see in just a second. But there's also this problem, and to fix that we just want to give this a padding of 0, because before we did that there was some padding that the unordered list was pushing these list elements over a little bit. And so we just want to get rid of that in the unordered list and just push that over to the side. And we will deal with these, extending these underlines in just a little bit. But now let's go ahead and add this advertisement image. You just want to go and search maybe for like horizontal banner ad on Google, find anything that looks like this. And what we're going to do is come back to our HTML and say image. Here's another tag that does not have a closing tag. And to link this, I'm not going to use href this time. Image uses something called source. So I've downloaded an image that looks like that, and I've come over to my new website directory, and I've created a new folder called images, where I'm going to keep all of the images in one folder. And here I just have the image, and I've called it banner ad. So let's go ahead and add that into our page now. I'm going to give it the path, images, banner-ad.jpg. Save it, and come back over here, and now I've inserted that image nicely into this column. Okay, cool. So we've created this whole left column. Now we want to create the rest of the page. But we can see that this is not only a column, this is a column with columns within it that have more columns within it. So this is important because HTML flow layout typically does what the divs do, is just like row by row. That's pretty standard. But columns are an important way of actually styling web pages and seeing web pages. So let's see how to create these columns. The first thing I want to do is create a new div tag. So I have a new div tag, and just to show you what happens here, I'm just going to put this P tag in here, which just means paragraph. Come back over here. And we can see that the div just put it underneath this div, because if you can imagine, this whole area is just one row right now, even though it looks like a column. And it's just going row by row, but what we want to do is put the divs next to each other in columns. So to do that, let's first of all give some IDs to our divs. I'm going to call the first one, or the left column, add tab, and the second one right container. And then I'm going to come back to the main CSS, say add tab, and right container. So the first thing I want to do is give add tab the directive float left. And this is going to take the whole div that I have and mush it to the left, basically, and make sure that it stays there as a column. And I also want to give it a specific width. And I've already measured this stuff so you can follow along with me. I just did 150 pixels. And the last thing I want to do is give it a little bit of padding, 5 pixels. Now, to style the right side, to do the right container, what I want to do first of all is give a border so I can see what I'm working with here. Here's that same border directive. It's just a shorthand way of doing a border, just the width or the thickness of the border. The style of it can be solid, dotted, dashed, etc. and the color. The other thing I want to do is say border radius, about 3 pixels, and border radius does, it just rounds the corners off, because the page doesn't actually have squared right angle corners, so that's what that does. And then finally, my margin left, I want to give 165 pixels, just a little bit more than the width of this column. So let's come back here. Actually, let's add something to the right container so that we can see. Let's just give it a header and this play on Facebook, which is just Farsbook. Clever indeed, I know. So here we go. So now we've created these columns and we've got our header. So we're getting somewhere here. The next thing we want to do is create these this menu over here. So we've already seen how to create a menu with the unordered list. Let's see what happens when we create this unordered list. So I've created the tabs that I want here, but the problem is unordered list naturally goes down like the rows that divs follow. What I want is them to be something called inline, like this. So how do we make this happen? Well, let's give some style to this. So first thing is first, let's give this an ID so that we can look at it in the CSS file. I'll just call it menu. Let's come over here. And what I want to give menu is, let's get some margins going. This is just going to give us a margin of 10 pixels on top and nothing around anywhere else. And let's get rid of that padding again. Okay. Didn't do much for us yet. I also want to get rid of the list style type. And now what I'm going to do is say menu and extend to the list item. So what this means is I'm going to take the element that has ID of menu and take all of its list item children. And here what I want to do is change the display property to inline block. And so now what we have is an inline menu as opposed to a menu that cascades down. But I also want the menu to be over here. So what I'm also going to do is float the menu to the right. and we can see that floating it over does this, but it does push this down as if this logo is still taking up all the space on the width of our column here. And to fix that, I want to do something similar that I did with the list items. I'm going to come over here and give this header an ID and call it logo. And let's just put it right before menu. And change the display property to inline block. This is another way to create inline style, inline layouts on the page. It's an important way of being able to manage this, really. So I want to actually style the logo a little bit more too, and get rid of some of the margin and padding stuff. And so I'll just set those both to 0, and I also want to color it white. So the style directive for coloring the text is just color. And you know what, it's going to disappear now that I just made it white, so that's great. Let's figure out now, we obviously don't want this part of the column to be white. As we can see, the text is white, but this part of the column is not. We're giving different rows here different colors. So let's see how to do that. What I want to do is actually create a new div here within my right container. Just give it a tag, and it's going to encompass everything I've done, this header, this logo, and the menu. And I want to call it heading for now. And so I'm going to come over back here, and background color, here's a hexadecimal value for the blue that Facebook uses, or blue that's pretty close to it. And finally, just a little bit of padding. Cool. So now we've created the first part of our column. There's some more stuff that we want to do with this though too, so let's go back to our style. And this time I want to extend menu to the list element, and the list element to the anchor element. So every list element that has an anchor element will get this style. What I want to say is color light gray. That'll give the text the color light gray. I want to get rid of the margins and padding again. And this time I want to give a new one called text decoration none. And that's going to get rid of the underline under the current list items. And let's say I'm going to give this a transition property as well. And we're going to see what that is in just a second. The transition, if you've ever been on a page and scrolled over these, you'll see then maybe the box will change color, maybe just the text will change color. That's what we want to do, really. To do that, I'm going to come back here and say menu lia : hover, and change the color to white, transition 0.1 seconds. So what this means is it'll transition from light gray to white in 0.1 seconds, and then when I scroll off, it'll transition back to light gray in 0.1 seconds. So you can see that now we've got kind of a nice looking menu here. Actually, I wanted to change this to this padding not to 0 but to 10 pixels so that we can spread out these items a little bit more to make it not so squished and look like this. So let's continue on and just move downwards from now. And let's do this second part. Below the heading div, I want to create yet another div, and I want to give it an ID, and I'll just call this subheading. The subheading has two parts to it. this your name's profile and where you're from. Jon Snow's from the north. Well, technically he's from Dorne, but you get the point. Sorry if I spoiled anything for you. Shouldn't be a spoiler at this point. But so here I'm going to use the paragraph tag again. And let's say Jon Snow's profile and the north. But these paragraph tags are going to stack again, not like how I want them to. I want them to be next to each other, and I want them to be styled a little bit differently too, a little bit larger and different color. So I've just given the paragraphs some IDs so that I can style them in my style sheet, so let's do that now. The first thing I want to do is take my subheading tag, which is the div that contains both of these paragraph tags, and I want to actually extend this to both of the tags that it has, because they both share something. They both share the same font size, which is 22 pixels, and the same color, which is white. The profile tag, or the part that says Jon Snow's profile that says you, I want to display as an inline block again. And I want to give it a margin left of 10 pixels, just so it's not pushed up directly against the side of the left side. For the profile location, I want to do something similar like I did with the menu in the heading. I want to float right and just give it a margin right for the same reason as I did margin left on this one. And let's come back up here, and because I made them white, it's not going to show up, so let's just give the subheading a background color. Here's the background color that I'm using, different shade of blue that kind of goes with the Facebook blue. But we want to change as well some sizing here, and there's this little sliver down here that looks like it could be another row. Let's do that part. First of all, let's give this a different padding. And again, I've already measured this. You can play around if you'd like, or you can just follow along with me. Instead of doing like another div under the subheading to give that little blue sliver, all I'm going to do, because it's so thin and because it's pretty just like an accent, I'm just going to give this subheading a style of border bottom. I'll make it 2 pixels in thickness, make it solid, and give it this color, which is the same color as the heading. Okay, cool. So now I've given this little sliver here. I also just realized that I did something in this other page that I'm just gonna copy and paste here. I just set every header element 1 and 2 to just have no margin, and as well as the paragraph. I don't have to write it like this. I can actually just do h1, h2, paragraph, because they all share the exact same style property of just giving it a 0 margin. The body also is going to have a margin of 0, a padding of 0, and the background is already white, so I don't need to worry about that. And that's what gives me the layout that looks like this, actually. So, moving right along. Now we have our profile picture, Jon Snow, over here, and we've got a list underneath here, and we've got another column we can actually see that we have 2 more columns embedded here. So we've got basically this side with the status, friends, profile picture, and then this side with the information, photos, groups, etc. So let's create these columns. So just beneath this subheading, I want to create a new div, and I want to give it an ID called section. Section is going to contain just about everything in the actual profile page. and that's just going to be embedded into this whole column that we've just created. Now we have two parts of the section, right? We've got two columns, so we want a left column and a right column. So because I'm just calling this section, and you can really call this stuff whatever you want, whatever makes sense to you, I'm going to give this an ID of section left, and that's going to contain everything on the left, and this will be the section right, which will contain everything in the right column, and call it section right. So let's just start with this section. Let's start with just the left. And the first part of this section is an image of Jon Snow, or whatever you want to use. I just use Jon Snow. And again, I'm using the image tag with source and the path to jonsnow.jpg. Obviously too big right now, so let's style this a little bit before we go any further. I'm just going to give this image an ID called profile, and I'm going to come back to my style sheet here, and I just want to give it this width property for now. The width will set just basically the size of the image. Usually you don't want to mess with both the width and height, because then you'll end up distorting it unless you work with percentages, so I'll just give it a pixel value right now for the width. And then we want to create this menu, this list beneath here, so let's do that. And I've just created another unordered list, and I actually gave it the class called list that we created earlier up here, so that it looks the same, and just filled in the stuff inside of the list items. So now we've got that, and don't worry, we'll style these too, and everything will end up looking like this in the end. We're just going to go through the structure and some basic style now before we finesse it. Let's add these things now, the status and the friend section. So I'm just going to put this right beneath the list that I just created, and I'm going to give this a new class, and I'm just going to call it section tab. Before we go and style this, I want to create another div as well, and give this a class called section tab bar. Essentially what I'm doing here, what I want to do with this, is if we look at our original page here, these are going to be pretty ubiquitous as far as how we're going to create what I'm calling here section tab. So the section tab here has this bar, and the section tab itself is what encompasses everything in the actual tab. So let's just go back to our CSS and style these things now. Well, actually, let's give some content here, just so that we can see this stuff. The first part is the status bar, and let's do another paragraph and say these two will be inline, status and edit. As you can see, these will be next to each other. I hope you're starting to get a gist for how these guys actually work, as far as styling things that are next to each other, far apart. You know, just one is all the way on the left, one is all the way to the right. And I can see that I'm going to be doing that a lot, so let's just go ahead and create classes to do it for us. And this will be align left, and this will be align right. Align right. Let's go style those. So for align right, what I want to do is float it to the right, like we did before, and give it margin right, 10 pixels, like we did before. for align left, this will be margin left 10 pixels like we did before, and a display of inline block. So these classes will allow us to just like automatically give the style directives that allow us to put things next to each other. And so now at least we're floating them next to each other, but what we want to do is limit the size of this to be just like within. Well, what we're really going to do is the div is going to take up 100% of the column, not 100% of the screen. That's what we want to do for this. We want to have this status bar taking up the column, not the whole screen. Similarly for these, as you can see, if we're just creating a class for this, we're not actually specifying widths for this. We're just going to give some style to the actual left and right section and make sure that the divs spread out across their sections, their respective sections alone. So let's see how we can do that. So I've already created a section left and a section right here for these divs. Let's put a little bit of content in the section right. Let's go ahead and just make another section tab, the section tab bar, and the two paragraph elements aligned next to each other. The first one on this column is information for the right column. So let's style these section left and section right tabs. So for section right, I'm going to give a margin left of 300 pixels, and for the section left, I'm going to have this float to the left and give it a width of 280 pixels. So you may be noticing a trend here, the way that I'm making columns versus the way that I'm pushing two different elements to the right and left of each other in line. There are, of course, other ways to make these layouts, but this is the way that I prefer to do it. And I just realized that in my style sheet, these should be IDs, not classes. Sorry about that. Yeah, so there we go. So now we're getting a little somewhere with all of this. So let's continue styling these section tabs here. So I have these two classes, section tab and section tab bar. Oh yeah, I put these borders here just for debugging. The section tab bar is going to have a border top of 2 pixels solid, this main blue color, and then its background color will be this one. And I'm gonna leave section tab just blank for now, but we're gonna do something else with that later on. Okay, cool. So there's something else that you may notice is wrong here. Our border for this, for our whole section, for this whole tab, is not coming down with us. And that's because we floated this element, this column, to the left, which means it no longer is part of the vertical height property. It's no longer part of how HTML is rendering the height for the element that it belongs to. Now, because we have this div element that's not floated, this is what is determining the height. So there's an easy hack for this. The hack that I'm going to do is I'm going to take this div section now, this ID section, I'll just put it right up here, and I want to say overflow auto. And now the float property does belong to the height, the way that the height is being rendered here. There are other ways to hack that as well, but this is, I thought, the easiest one. I also want to do something else to the section, the main section. I just want to give it a little padding. So that's 10 on the top, 10 on the right, nothing on the bottom, and 10 on the left. So now we're not just squishing it down. You also may notice that this image is centered within the column again, though. So this is a little bit tricky because images work a little bit differently how they're centered. So let's see how to do it. I want to come back up here to the profile ID that I tagged that as, and I want to give it a property display block. That's the first part. Second part is I want to set the margin to 0 auto. When items are displayed as block, setting margin 0 auto, this shortcut is 0 top and bottom, auto for left and right, which is going to allow us to center the image. And actually I want to go ahead and put 10 pixels on the bottom, so that this shortcut is top, right, left, and then bottom. Okay, so let's add a little bit of content here, and then we'll get to how to do these little images in the friend box. Right under the section tab bar, I want to create a new div and just give it updated several weeks ago, whatever. That's just how the image looked when I was rendering this. I put this in the wrong box, sorry. This should be in the left column for status. Yeah, there we go. And just to make this look a little bit neater, I'm going to come back over here to this div. I'm going to create a class called pad, just because I might use this later on, just because we're going to need to just add just padding to probably a lot of things. Let's go down here, pad, just a padding 10 pixels. And you'll notice too the way that I'm indenting this, sometimes this gets out of track. I like to just think of things indented nicely, like section right and section left, or children of section, and so forth. Just makes things neater to read. So let's come back. Got some more padding here, that looks nicer. Let's add another section tab. So we come back here to our HTML, and right under this section tab, let's add another one. We have a section tab and the section tab bar. Paste that, and this will be our friends tab. Okay. Now, in this part of the thing, we've got some images lined up like this, and this is going to be another neat little trick as far as how we deal with inline blocks and images. So actually the first thing I want to do for this is create another div, and I'm going to give this an ID and call it friends container. I'm also going to give this another div inside of here that's just going to contain my image as well as the text underneath it, which is the paragraph, because I just want to contain, if you'll see here, I just want to contain the name just like centered underneath the image. So that's what I'm making this for. So I went ahead and just filled out all these images. I just pulled these images of Ed and Tormund and Sansa and Ghost, like pretty much just like all of Jon Snow's friends, all 5 of them, if even. So you guys can find some pictures if you'd like. You can do this with whatever you want to size that or to put that in. But you can see that the sizing is way off here. We haven't styled anything about the images here, so let's do that next. So I have my ID friends container, and I'm just going to go ahead and extend that to div, because divs are containing just about everything that we need for this part, and I'm going to give this display inline block. Now, sometimes what you want to do instead of inline block is just straight up float it, but again, there's a problem with the float property, because it causes problems with the layout sometimes. Again, because floated items aren't part of the inline layout. Their vertical align property is pretty complex and is like more or less determined by the top of the inline box. So don't worry about too much about what all that means. You can just follow along with me, and trust me that inline block is the right move for this. I want to set the width to 70 pixels. I want to give a padding of 10 pixels. I want to vertical align my images to the top, which just means I want the top of my image to be pushed up to just where the top of my row is. And finally, I want my text aligned to the center, so that the text is just centered for the image. That created some problems. Sorry, I just realized too that I put the friends in the wrong part. It should be in the friends tab and not the information tab. Sorry about that. So that's where that goes. And there's another problem here too. Forgot to mention, this should be div and image, because the image needs its own width property, and so does the div. And because the div also contains the paragraph text, that's why I have this text line here. So there we go. That looks a little bit better. There's also two things I missed here. I wanted to give the anchor just a text decoration of none, so it didn't show up with the underline. And also, I needed to target the image for the section tab. So any image in the section tab is going to be a width of 70 pixels and also vertical aligned to the top. So I needed to specify specifically that the image also needed to be vertical aligned to the top and have its own width, as well as the div within the friends container. And that will give me this nicer look so that the text isn't looking a little bit wonky. So now this looks more like what we have originally, and is our better layout. So cool. So now we've got a lot of this whole left section done. Let's take a look at the information section. This information section, well, this is a lot of information, of course, and this looks kind of like it would be kind of mean to do this with just aligning things to the right and left. What this really looks more like is a table to me, and that's what we're going to use. We're going to use an HTML table now for this information section. So let's see how to do that. So I'm going to come down here underneath where I have the information section tab, and I want to create a table, an HTML table, and nice and easy to remember, it's just a table tag. And within the table, the first thing I want to do is define a table row. And a table row is just one row of one table, and within this row I can create columns, but for the first row I don't want any columns, I just want a table header. So this is one row here, this is another row, this is another row, and these things like name and Jon Snow are things called table data. This is a table header. So let's continue working on that. So the first thing is the table header is account info, and then it looks like edit. And if you wanted to make this clickable, of course, you just add the anchor tag. I'm not going to do that right now. You've seen how to do that. So I'm going to make another table row, and this table row is going to have the table data. And table datas are these TD tags, are what define the columns in a table. So one row, you can have multiple table datas, and each of these TDs will be a column. So the first one is name, and then John Snow. Okay, so I've gone ahead and just filled in some more table rows and table data. Let's come back over here to our page, and that's what we get. Pretty nice. So this looks like we could just do the whole thing with one table and just make table header, table data, table header, table data, and you totally could. But what I actually want to do is make this into multiple tables. I'm just going to copy and paste this into another table and just fill in the information, and I'm just going to go ahead and do all of this information now. Okay, I went ahead and filled in the rest of the information and the rest of the tables. You'll also notice too that I added a class to all of these tables called info table so that I can touch them later and style them. And I also did this. I said call span equals 2 for the table header, and what that means is it's not going to like stop at the first column of the next row. It'll actually just take up both of those columns so that it's just one solid row across both columns, like you would think it would be in like maybe an Excel sheet or a table of some kind like that. And let's take a look at that on our page. And so basically what happened actually when I did call span like that was this got centered, the table header got centered. So I want to let's actually just go ahead and style the info table right now. So I just want to come down here and say info table, and the first thing I want to do for this is just set some margins up, and then I'm going to say info table and extend to the table header, and I want to just force this back to the left so that it stays where I want it to, and I want to give it a color, this main blue color. And then I also want to style the table data. I just give it a color gray and a width as well so that we get a little bit nicer spacing between these. And that's what we get here. So now that's looking a little bit nicer. But we can see though that the data on this side is actually a bit longer typically, and it's a different color. So the next question is, how do we touch this second data table, the second table data item only, so like the second column of each table? To do that, I'm going to come back to my style sheet and say info table again and say TD. This time I'm going to say TD plus TD, and that is what's going to give us the second column of each table. And here is where I'm going to specify the black color and give it a longer width, let's say 250 pixels, so that it looks more like what we have. And yes, that's exactly what we get. So we just worked with some tables here. That should be pretty straightforward. And now let's move on to the next one. Let's move on to the Photos tab, and then we'll do groups, and then we'll style up this wall. So I'm just going to come back here to my index HTML that we've been working on, and we need to make those section tabs. So what I'm going to do from here is just add the next couple of sections in this one. So what we need to do is just right after this information tab is go ahead and add another section tag. Give that the class section tab, sorry. And I'm just going to fill out the next couple of them that are left on this page. Okay, so I've just added these last three section tabs, and that's photos, groups, and wall. Those are the last things we're going to fill out here. So I'm just going to leave those as placeholders right now. I just want to go back to for a second and fix this thing. I just noticed that I meant to do this earlier. We're going to make this a little bit different. I told you before that we've got the underline going across the whole width here. So let's make that happen for these. And the way that we're going to do that is we're going to come back over here to our style sheet for list. And I'm going to say that the lists for the list item, I'm just going to give this a border bottom of 1 pixel solid gray. And that's going to replace the underline. So what I also need to do is say list LIA, and that is going to have this line, text decoration none, so I can get rid of the actual default underline and then give it the color that I want for each of them, which is this color here, the same blue color that we've been working with. And that's how we get those to look a little bit nicer. So if you ever want to underline anything that is like in this fashion, you saw that I just used the border bottom to give it the illusion that it is an underline for the list item. So another thing too is you can probably notice that these parts, status and edit things for the section tabs, here they're just the same color and they're bold, like these parts. And all I did for that, I'm just going to go back to my style sheet here, and I'm going to say the section tab bar, and extend that to the paragraph elements, each paragraph element, and then give it this color, the same color that we've been working with here. And I'm also going to say font weight bold, and that's just another property. That's a CSS property to make things bolded, like so, and then we get this nice blue bold color for that. Okay, so let's move on to this Photos tab here, which is going to end up looking like this. One thing you'll notice too is that we've got an extra little bar down here, so we'll add that, and then we'll add these photos that represent albums that you can click on. So let's come back to our HTML document and come down to where I have photos, and then I'm going to make another div, and I'm going to give this another class, and I'm going to call this class just section tab subbar, and that's going to give us that little gray subbar that we have, and in it we've got the same sort of texts going on. Yeah, so this is, you'll notice it's the same paragraph aligned left and right. The only difference is I added some hrefs here so that you can click on the albums and you can click on see all. So you can see that you have 4 albums, and then you can click on see all. And then I also want to come back over to my style sheet, and so I can style the section tab subbar. And for section tab subbar, I'm just going to give this a background color, as well as a thin top border of light gray. And it's pretty subtle, but it does give us like a little buffer between the blue and the gray. It looks pretty nice. So let's add the photos. So come back down to here in your HTML document where you have the section tab for photos. Go ahead and create yet another div. This is going to be the container for where we put our photos. And of course we need some images, so let's go ahead and link some of those images. The first one I chose was just the jonsnow.jpg, and for the text next to it, I'm actually going to come back to my table element and give it the class that we made before called info table. And in the info table I just added 2 rows, just 2 rows. One has a header and one is just the table data. And then I'm going to do the same thing for just the other image. I'll just copy and paste that. and change the image. So the image will be Jon Snow 2, and the data will just be some things that I just made up, as if Jon Snow has his own Facebook albums taking pictures back at Winterfell now that he's back there. And so let's go look at our page now and see what happened. Well, first of all, I actually need to bring in that extra picture. I forgot that I didn't copy that in. But we also want this table data to be next to the photo and not but beneath it. So we've seen many examples of this already, and so you can probably guess that we're going to need to give this table an inline block property. So let's do that. First thing I'm going to do is come back here and give this class the same class I had before called pad, which is just going to give us a little extra padding. And then I'm also going to create a new class called albums that we're going to use to style these. So let's come back to our CSS, and I'll just call this albums down here. And there's two things that we're going to style for the albums class, and that is the image in the albums class as well as the table. So I'm just going to extend down using the same class and then extending to image and then the class and then the table. The image I'm going to give a property width of 100 pixels, and that will just override the 70 pixel width that I gave to just like all section tab images before, just because I want these images to be a little bit bigger, so that'll just be overridden. And then I'm going to go ahead and display the table as inline block, and then vertical align that guy to the top for the same reason that we did the vertical align top for the images and divs in the Friends tab over here. And so here we go. That's what that looks like. Let me just pull in this extra image and just copied and pasted that image from my old folder into the new one so I could just get that working. So there is it. So now we've got the album tab, and of course if you wanted to be able to actually click on the image to go to that, you've seen how to do that. We just wrap it in an anchor tag and it would be clickable from there. But let's move on to the group section. Let's look at what that looks like. Not much to it other than this maybe bullet point in between each of them, and you can see that each of these are clickable as well, so they will also be the A tags. And as usual, the way to start this is come back to your HTML document where I have groups, create a new div, and I'm going to give this div the class pad again, because that's all I need to do is just pad it, and then the rest is just text. And there we go. And you can also see that the HTML character for that bullet point is just that ampersand bull. Another nifty little thing. There are actually a lot of different HTML symbols that you can use like this that makes it a lot neater and nicer to use than trying to go and make these like maybe like lists, bullets, or images or something like that. Okay, so good. We're almost done here. Let's style up the wall part, and that's just going to be making essentially a post class. So let's make that right now. Let's come back to our HTML page where I have wall. First of all, we have that subheader again, so I'm going to give that class the section tab subheader, subbar, I mean. And then there we go for our text. Same thing with the paragraphs and these anchor tags that are making links out of some of this text. Let's come back and see that on our page that we're making here. So good, we've got that. And actually, before we go any further too, I just want to throw in a footer so that we're not just pushing down to the bottom of the page here. So let's put a little padding here, and to do that we're going to add a footer, and that's going to be right after this div tab here, which is our right container. And this time I'm just going to go with the semantic footer tag and just give it a paragraph. Just say something like copyright 2016, and I bet you can guess that there's also a symbol for copyright. You can look that up if you want. So there's actually one other thing I want to do with this footer, and that's just actually give it some space. So to do that, I'm just going to give it a margin top of, let's say, 100 pixels, and then add a little padding, say 15 pixels for the paragraph, just so that we get a little space down here. And let's go ahead and finish up doing the wall stuff then. And so come back to your HTML document, and where we have the wall section tab, let's create another div beneath that. And I'm going to give this a class called post. And what I'm going to do is actually just structure this all out right now, and then we'll go to the style so we can just do it all at once. And the way I'm going to structure this is I'm going to put my image first, of course, and that's I'll just put the first one is going to be Liana Mormont, just PNG, and then I'm going to create two other divs, and this is going to make up essentially the template for our post, and I'll show you what that is going to look like in just a second, and why we're doing this. I'm going to give these two classes, and the first one is going to be called post upper, and the second one will be called post lower, and that's just so we can split up the different pieces of the post. And that's because the first part of the post, the upper part of our post section, is going to contain these paragraphs and anchor tags that say, like, who such and such wrote whatever at that such and such a time. As you can see here, like Tormund wrote this at blah blah, Liana wrote this. That's going to be our upper part of the post. The full post is what's containing what contains everything in here, and this section down here is going to be the lower post. So we've got containers for all of those sections that we'll style up soon, and of course we get the same problem with the layout. This will eventually become inline. As you can see, this will be inline, and let's just add the rest of the data here. And Liana is just congratulating John on his big win. She's definitely got his back. Also gave this first paragraph a class called post message, because I'm going to do some styling of the actual message here. And then this second paragraph, this code is actually for, I believe it's the thumbs down icon, and then this one is for the thumbs up icon. So again, it's nice to have those HTML icons built in, and then I just added some anchors to the words where I want them to be actual links. So that's what the HTML looks like plain, and I'm just going to go ahead and copy and paste the same post class, which is basically our template for making a post, and this one will be Tormund JPG, and we'll just change the data. So I just changed up the data. Tormund saying, "What's up, Tiny Pecker?" He's a funny guy. And so that's the data that we've got. So now let's go ahead and style this stuff, make this stuff inline, give it little background colors and borders, and we should be all styled up here, and that should be the end of making this page. So let's finish up. Let's come back to our style sheet and make a post class, as well as a post upper, post lower, and post message class. But actually, first I want to come back to the HTML document, and I just want to make two different wrapper containers. The first one is going to be called, actually, this will go down here. This will wrap all of the posts, and I'm going to call this, I guess I can give it an ID, call it wall posts. And for the post upper and post lower stuff, I'm going to create another wrapper for these guys so it's all contained together in one container. And I'll give that a class called post content. And do that for both here. So let's come back actually over here and let's change this. Let's add some stuff actually. First thing, I just want to make the class for wall posts, which is our main wrapper. And wall posts, I just want to give that some padding, maybe 15 pixels, and overflow auto again, just so that when more and more posts are stuck into that div, it'll just continue to grow with it. And post, all I'm really looking at the post part of it is just what the image within each post is. And what I'm going to do here is float these images left, give them a width 70 pixels, like standard width that we're working with. And before I do the post upper and lower stuff, I want to do a post content and write this class and indent. And the post content is just going to have a margin that I've already measured out, just some margins all around to make it look nice. And so our post upper part is going to have a background color of this color, as well as a top and bottom border. The top one will be 2 pixels, and then the bottom will be 1 pixel. And this is, we can see what color that is. We can start to see that this is coming together a bit. For post lower, I just want a simple border bottom. For post message, I just want simple margin, 10 pixels on the right and left. Or I'm sorry, 10 pixels top bottom. And that's what that will give us. And there's another thing too I want to do here. For post lower, P plus P, and post upper, P plus P. And we saw what that means again. That's going to give us the second paragraph within post lower, so the second child paragraph. And for these, I just want to give this a different font size. Let's say 13 pixels. And I miswrote this again. Wall post is an ID, not a class, so that'll give us the padding that we're actually looking for, which ends up looking like this. So cool. So now that's basically all that there is to this page. Let's look. This is my original page. This is the page that we've made. The only thing that I can see that's different maybe now is just this search box is a little bit smaller. All you really have to do is go back to your HTML and find the search box, like all the way up here at the top. It was an input box. Just give that an ID, or even maybe just give it an inline style tag to change like the size of it and the font size, and maybe give it some margins around there. Not very important right now, though. You understand now how to do that. So yeah, so this is what we've created. We've created this page, and we've learned quite a bit about HTML structure and the layouts, inline layouts, flow layouts, style properties like float, and not a terrible amount of code, really. I mean, just less than 300 lines for the HTML document, and just less than 300 for the style sheet. And so that's pretty good. If you feel like you're just giving way too many classes or IDs to things, there are always ways to group certain style properties. Like you saw that I made one class for just pad. you saw that you can give commas to things just to sort of give them a ubiquitous style directive. There's all types of things you can do. I'm not going to get too much more into the more advanced CSS stuff like that, because to be completely honest, nowadays actually, and I didn't need the section tab after all. Didn't do anything with section tab. But nowadays, what's actually used more for styling is style frameworks like Bootstrap, you may have heard of, and I'll do a video on Bootstrap next. And actually, there's one other thing I want to do here for this page, and I'll show you what's going on with that now. So what we can see is, as we resize this page, things get really wonky, and all of a sudden this is not the page that we made anymore, and is really unreadable if you were to load this on a mobile phone or something like that. And so if you'll notice too, if you go and resize your Facebook, your actual Facebook profile or something, it doesn't just like shrink. If you're on a web browser, it doesn't shrink. Facebook will actually know if you're using a mobile device, and it'll change it for you there. But if you're on a web browser, it won't. And so I want to introduce one last thing before we finish up here, and that is called a media screen. And it's a style property. It's typed like this. I'm going to say @media screen and max width 900 pixels. And what I want to say inside of this bracket is my right container. I want to hard code a width for it now and say 725 pixels. So what this is saying is when the screen that you're looking at, if it's less than 900 pixels, go ahead and just fix the width of the right container to 725 pixels. And what that's going to do is ensure that as we're collapsing, that will just stay the same width, and it won't just collapse over onto and spill over everything and disappear and all that stuff, which is actually the way that Facebook does it when you're on the browser, on a computer browser. And so this is actually a fundamental thing about responsive design, and Bootstrap library uses media screens within its code to do the things that it does. So when we get to Bootstrap, we'll see how the media screens are done pretty much automatically in Bootstrap, which is really nice. And there's a lot of good classes for different elements that are automatically responsive, but this is the fundamental way to do responsive design. And so let's see what happens here now. I go save and refresh, and as I'm shrinking, all of a sudden it stops. So I'm shrinking, and all of a sudden it's no longer sticking to the edge of the page. Now it's just giving me this scroll bar. And I set these widths on my screen. I believe they should work for any screen, just that will look good. So now you see it's extending out to 100%. Whereas when I shrink it, it'll follow it for a moment until it hits that 900 pixels, and everything less than 900 pixels here will now this right container is fixed at a width of 725 pixels. So that's how you use media screens, and you can do a whole bunch of things with it. Really what you would want to do if you're making this responsive yourself with media screens is change some style, like the style properties of everything as it's collapsing. And what you could really do is, as it collapses, you could go through several iterations of different style directives for each element, and get to the point where really it would look nice on any screen of any size, no matter what browser or mobile device. But again, Bootstrap is a library that's built specifically for that. So I think the next video I'll be doing some Bootstrap stuff to show you how that works. In any case, I'll put all this code up for you guys. Hopefully you learned something from it. Hopefully you enjoyed it. And thanks so much for tuning in again. This is our first HTML and CSS page that we've created, and I hope you tune in for the next video as well. Thanks so much.